This is part 2 of the Standardized Tests module. In this module, we will cover the types of standardized tests along with their characteristics and limitations. We will also cover some of the principles that should govern the use of standardized tests. Finally, we will talk about administration of standardized tests. Standardized tests are tests administered and scored in a consistent manner. The tests are designed in such a way that the questions, conditions for administering, scoring procedures, and interpretations are consistent and are administered and scored in predetermined standard manner. Think about some of the standardized tests you have taken. Some of the typical ones are the SAT or the ACT. The GRE is also a standardized test. In the K-12 sector, you may have heard about or encountered tests like the AIMS, the Peabody Individual Achievement Test, or the Woodcock-Johnson Tests of Achievement. You probably remember that these tests seem much more formal than the tests you typically took in the classroom. The person administering the test provided directions using a script, and often parts of the test were timed very strictly. These are all typical of standardized tests. More specifically, standardized tests are characterized by a systematic procedure for describing behaviors, whether in terms of numbers or categories. They include specific procedures for administration and scoring. Often, they require specialized training in order to be able to administer them. They have an established format and materials that must be followed. The same tasks are presented to each person taking the test, and the correct answer is very clearly described for scoring purposes. The test takers must answer in the way indicated in the scoring criteria in order to receive credit. Standardized tests also provide tables of norms to which the scores of test takers can be compared in order to determine their relative standing. Norm reference tests allow us to compare a student's skills to others in his or her age group. Norm reference tests are developed by creating test items and then administering the test to a group of students that will be used as the basis of comparison. Statistical methods are used to determine how raw scores will be interpreted and what performance levels are assigned to each score. Many tests yield standard scores, which allow comparison of student scores to other tests. After the norming process, the tests are used to assess groups of students or individuals using standardized or highly structured administration procedures. These students' performance is rated using scales developed during the norming process. Statistics used by norm reference tests include percentile ranks, grade equivalents, and standard scores. Percentile rank is the percentage of scores in its frequency distribution which are lower or equal to it. For example, a test score which is greater than or equal to 85% of the scores of people taking the test is said to be at the 85th percentile. A grade equivalent is a score reported on norm reference tests that allows educators and parents to compare students based on the performance of other students relative to the school year. Based on a 9-month school year, typically September through May, the score represents a period during the school year, displayed as a number to show a grade and a month. The score is an estimate of the performance that an average student at a grade level is assumed to demonstrate on the test at a particular time in the school year. For example, a score of 5.8 represents a performance level typical of a 5th grade student in the 8th month of the school year. It is important to note The grade equivalent scores outside the current grade are common and should be interpreted with caution. For example, a 5th grade student could receive a grade equivalent score of 7.4. This does not mean the student can perform 7th grade work. The student would not have been exposed to 7th grade content, nor would a 5th grade test contain 7th grade content. It suggests that a typical 7th grader in the 4th month would have received the same score if the 7th graders had taken a 5th grade test. Standard scores are used in norm-referenced assessment to compare one student's performance on a test to the performance of other students her age. Standard scores estimate whether students' scores are above average, average, or below average compared to their peers. They also enable comparison of students' scores on different types of tests. A standard score indicates how far a particular score is from a test's average. The unit that tells the distance from the average is the standard deviation for that test. The standard deviation is always given for a standard score. A criterion reference test is a testing instrument in which the test taker's performance is interpreted by comparing it with a pre-specified standard or specific content and/or skills. On a criterion reference test, it is possible that none or all of those being tested will reach a particular goal or performance standard. Standardized tests are not without their limitations. First, there are considerable technical and education inadequacies for standardized tests. Many tests for young children do not meet the standards for educational and psychological testing. Besides, skills tend to be tested in isolation in standardized tests, and thus may not be indicators of final performance. Second, standardized tests have witnessed both overuse and misuse. Too much time and money have been spent on testing. For instance, teachers have been estimated to spend up to 1 month on test preparation. Further, standardized tests, especially when involving high-stakes decisions, may be used to place some students in wrong programs or deny their education opportunity based on their test results. For instance, poor performance in standardized tests may result in retention, which, according to studies, is not beneficial for students or the education system at large. Standardized tests are not without their limitations. First, there are considerable technical and education inadequacies for standardized tests. Many tests for young children do not meet the standards for educational and psychological testing. Besides, skills tend to be tested in isolation in standardized tests, and thus may not be indicators of final performance. Second, standardized tests have witnessed both overuse and misuse. Too much time and money have been spent on testing. For instance, teachers have been estimated to spend up to 1 month on test preparation. Further, standardized tests, especially when involving high-stakes decisions, may be used to place some students in wrong programs or deny their education opportunity based on their test results. For instance, poor performance in standardized tests may result in retention, which, according to studies, is not beneficial for students or the education system at large. Third, it is not unusual that standardized tests are found to poorly serve certain populations, such as children of poverty, ethnic minority, or divergent creative thinking. Young children are particularly poorly served by standardized tests. Some simply don't want to play those adult games. Some get bored, distracted, or have trouble following the directions because most standardized tests are group administered. Fourth, standardized tests have brought undue influence on education. Many teachers are forced to teach to the test. There is always conflict between a national test and a local curriculum. This becomes particularly problematic when accountability is brought in by standardized tests to judge teaching quality and effectiveness. Standardized tests also create difficulty for ELL students. Some research indicates that it takes 5 to 7 years to acquire educational proficiency in English. However, ELL students cannot take their tests in their native language for numerous reasons, among which are that a test may not be available in their native language, and even when there is a test available, it may not be possible for there to be an exact equivalent, since content and vocabulary in one language may be either easier or more difficult conceptually when translated. A full discussion of the issues involving testing English language learners is beyond the scope of this course. However, it is important to recognize that the validity of instruments is questionable for ELL students. It is often unclear whether the tests are testing English fluency or the actual measure intended. Achievement tests are designed to measure what children have learned in school in general or in a specific area, and to show whether children are above or below a national, state, local average. As other norm reference tests, test items for achievement tests are a representative sample of knowledge that should have been learned at that grade level. Additionally, concepts and facts come from the most commonly used texts, books, and curricular materials at a given grade level. Examples of achievement tests include the CAT, ITBS, SAT-10, AIMS, etc. Standardized aptitude tests are intended to predict future performance or success in a given area of training or an occupation. They are often used for program placement, career decisions, to measure intellectual function, and as readiness tests. Standardized aptitude tests have been very controversial, and not without good reasons. It is highly doubtable that a single test may predict a young child's ability or potential ability. This is especially problematic when standardized achievement tests are used to make high-stakes decisions such as program placement and career choice, which are common among their uses. They are also problematic when used for young children, since little distinction can be made between aptitude and achievement in early childhood. Examples of standardized aptitude tests include the SAT, the ACT, WISC, etc. The following are 6 principles of standardized testing from the American Psychological Association, the American Educational Research Association, and the National Council on Measurement in Education. Number 1. Any decisions about students' continued education, such as retention, tracking, or graduation, should not be based on the results of a single test, but should include other relevant and valid information. Number 2. When test results substantially contribute to decisions made about student promotion or graduation, there should be evidence that the test addresses only the specific or generalized content and skills that students have had an opportunity to learn. Number 3. For tests that will determine a student's eligibility for promotion to the next grade or for high school graduation, Students should be granted, if needed, multiple opportunities to demonstrate mastery of materials through equivalent testing procedures. Number 4. When a school district, state, or some other authority mandates a test, the ways in which the test results are intended to be used should be clearly described. It is also the responsibility of those who mandate the test to monitor its impact, particularly on racial and ethnic minority students or students of lower socioeconomic status, and to identify and minimize potential negative consequences of such testing. Number 5. If students with limited English skills are to be tested in English, then their test scores should be interpreted in light of their limited English skills. For example, when a student lacks proficiency in the language in which the test is given, the test could become a measure of their ability to communicate in English rather than a measure of their other skills. Number 6. Special accommodations may be needed to ensure the test scores are valid for students with disabilities. Not enough is currently known about how particular test modifications may affect the test scores of students with disabilities. More research is needed. As a first step, test developers should include students with disabilities in field testing or pilot tests and document the impact of particular modifications, if any, for test users. Now let's turn to the process of administering a standardized test. Remember what we have discussed about the characteristics of standardized tests. One of them is to ensure that every test administration is exactly the same. Test manuals usually offer directions for how to give the test, how the room should be arranged, and how the score would be given. You must follow these directions when administering the test. In fact, violation to do so could very well result in the loss of your teaching certificate. Here are some general guidelines for your preparation of the test. However, please keep in mind that testing protocols vary. Only follow those guidelines below that are permitted by your particular testing protocol. Follow directions as closely as possible. Read the test manual ahead of time, if that is permitted. Practice reading directions until you can say them fluently, if viewing the directions early is permitted. Make sure children have what they need. If there is a kit, make sure the kit has everything you need before you start. Manuals often have frequently asked questions from children and some guidelines on how to answer those questions. However, think through how you will answer possible questions. Here are some general guidelines for administering the test. Before giving the test, you should familiarize students with the test format. The manual may come with test prep exercises. Have students do the exercises and explain, if necessary, why their answer is correct or incorrect. The manual should describe a policy about guessing. Follow those directions. Make sure you take time to establish rapport, especially if you are administering a test to children with whom you are not familiar. In the process of administering a test, test givers should remain positive, but not give too much praise. Smile. Say okay. Do not indicate if response is correct or incorrect. Give approval for trying an answer. If child makes mistakes or gets upset, comment on difficulty of the item and let them know that they are not expected to know everything. Here are some final thoughts on standardized tests. There are benefits and drawbacks to these tests. Regardless of your feelings about them, for the time being, they are here to stay. Therefore, it is important to understand their types and purposes, to understand how to interpret their results, to understand your requirements in administering them. Often, the lives of children, schools, and your career may hang in the balance.